G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Those of you familiar with the channel will no doubt be aware that roughly 6 weeks ago I decarbonised my brush cutting. Well, this thing's now done about 11.5 hours. I got all set up to make a video about it yesterday, but you know, the angle, the dangle of the sun wasn't quite right. The video didn't work out so well, so even though my figures were for 10 hours, or 10.5 hours, yesterday after I shot the video I went out and put in another hour and 2 minutes or something. So here we have the 6-week, I'm going to have to call it a flight test review. It's like my impressions of the new machine, with which I have been brush cutting in fairly difficult terrain, the sort of country that breaks strings. But nevertheless, it's the sort of country where you have to go around and brush cut. Otherwise, the potential for a grass fire fuel bomb is just insanely high. You can see what I've been doing around here. Hello. And this marks the transition line between where I haven't brush cut and where I have brush cut. And I'm sure you'll agree it would be very unpleasant to have any sort of bush as thick as this coming all the way up to the driveway and have to try and defend against a fire in that sort of fuel burden. And because I missed the the tiny little opportunity to burn in here, therefore I have to brush cut in order to achieve a semblance of bushfire suppression. Isn't that right? Eh? So this is the sort of country I've been operating on. And in this sort of country, the new electric brush cutter is capable, when I have the power availability set at 1/3, I can get an hour and a half brush cutting in that sort of country. And the two brush cutters do about the same amount of work in the same amount of time on the same job. I base that on the fact that last time I used the petrol powered Tanaka. This, by the way, is the result of my burn program. If you get around to it, then this is called epicormal regrowth, which is how eucalyptus trees come back after a fire. The regeneration is caused by the sub-bark fibres. Yeah, it took an hour on the Tanaka to cut the lawn at my son's workshop, plus a spare block. And yesterday I was in there and I was using the Husqvarna. I wonder what's been digging in there. And the Husqvarna took 1 hour and 3 minutes, or 1 hour and 2 minutes, to do the lawn at my son's workshop. So, yeah, both the machines do the same amount of work in the same amount of time. And, well, yeah, this is looking pretty good actually. Now, if I hadn't have burnt all that, I would have had to brush cut it. And the Tanaka would be using 1 litre per hour to do all that. And I would set out with 2 strings on the spool, 2 pairs of strings in my pockets, and I went through the logbook last night and I found that the average run time before having gone through 3 pairs of strings is 28.5 minutes. So I'd brush cut for half an hour, and then by that stage I would have busted 3 sets of strings, and I would be tired, hot, sweaty, sore back, and I would probably call that a day. Or if I was a real glutton for punishment, I'd go and refuel and make up another 3 pairs of strings to go out and do it again. I must say that trackable tower of power certainly gets a lot of work now that I cut down the trees on its eastern horizon. And 9:30 in the morning, it's quite easy to work in the shadow patches before the heat of the day. And what's going on is those solar panels are recharging the hut batteries to make up for the use of power I put in last night. So the modus operandi would be to go out and do an hour and a half brush cutting at this time of the day, while the solar panels currently putting, I make that about 7 amp hours. We're on bulk charge. 14.4 volts at the battery, 14.6 volts on the panels. So 7.8 amps going in, 17 amp hours today. I generally only use 20 to 30 amp hours per evening. So those batteries have been almost recharged, which means that after making this video, I'll be able to take a 300 watt hour battery, which was charged up after its last use, drop that into place, and because I'm a bugger for logbooks, I will fill out the Brushcutter's log and the batteries log. I generally do that when I come back from the job, after which an 80 watt charger is going to plug into the 300 watt inverter. What we can see there is that if we run the battery from 4 bars down to 1 blinking bar, which means you're between 5 and 10% charge remaining, that'll take 3 hours and 55 minutes to charge up using solar power and an 80 watt charger. And the 80 watt charger will pull about 6-7 amps because it's going to be pulling at 14 volts. While putting 80 watts into the battery, it's probably pulling about 110 watts out of the lead acid batteries. 80 watts goes into the lithium ion battery. Confusing, isn't it? Okay, so as you can see by this, I'm getting 90 minutes, 85 minutes brush cutting up here, and yesterday it was 62 minutes to do my son's workshop. If we go and have a look at the Tanaka 50cc 2.5 horsepower brush cutter, back in March I used 2.5 pairs of string. For 65 minutes I used a litre of fuel doing my son's workshop lawn. Meanwhile, 10 hours and 16 minutes of brush cutting used 10 litres and 70 mils of petrol. 10 litres for 10 hours, which is 16.3 mils per minute and an average of 28.45 minutes per session, using the trusty rusty old Tanaka. 1 litre per hour, $2 a litre for the petrol, 38 cents a litre for the 2-stroke oil, so you might as well say $2.40 an hour. And every 28 minutes you go through 3 pairs of strings, 6 individual strings. That is a pair of strings pre-cut, ready to go. And that is a pair which have got down to about that long when they have been basically too short to be any sort of use. You can see the kink just there. Well, that's not really long enough of a string to do anything but make a mess of your eardrums with the motor turning around at 12, 15,000 RPM to try and get the tip speed on the string to be good enough to actually cut the grass. Okay, so every string you get to waste the center. When using a 2-string 4-ended head, which weighs 187.3 grams when it's new and only 176.3 grams when it's old, as it gets ground away by the rocks. By comparison, I put about 4 meters of string into that at the 4 hour and 25 minute mark, or maybe about the 4 hour mark. So yeah, 6-7 hours, and that is literally what gets spat out after using 4 meters of string. When I was first using the electric machine, all my conditioned responses and reflexes, not reflexes, conditioned responses, were built around the petrol powered brush cutter. And the petrol powered brush cutter, think about it, there is a centrifugal clutch between the engine and the power head. That means you get used to the idea of blipping the throttle to maintain engine RPM, to maintain the clutch's grip in the powertrain, and that means you have to have fairly high tip speeds and string speeds and head speeds on the brush cutter, which, as you can see, it takes 10 minutes to break a pair of strings. Wear them down because you've got such high kinetic energy in the string. It's great when it's going through grass, but as soon as it hits a rock or a stick, it either breaks the stick or it breaks the end off the string. And if you hit the string close enough in, it'll break the string straight off at the bobbin. And once you've got an out of balance head, it all becomes totally bloody miserable. I don't get that problem with this. It also doesn't finish up with the grass wound around it or the flax lily wound around its head, forcing me to stop and go over, put the thing down and use a pocket knife to cut the grass away from it. It's much better at avoiding that. So every which way you look at it, it's better. It does the same amount of work on the same kind of terrain in the same amount of time as the petrol powered one. It wastes a lot less string. It'll go for an extra 30 minutes on a battery charge compared to a tank of fuel. And then we come to the most amazing part of all, which is, yeah, okay, on a day like today, it's easy to visualise brush cutting with solar powered electricity. Not a problem. But what about the last 2 or 3 days when we had rain? We had overcast. The Tower of Power was struggling to get, one day it only got 8 amp hours the whole day. I've got 650 amp hours worth of 12 volt storage, and I generally only use about 20-25 amp hours for the lights at night. So I could in theory have 3 completely sunless days, and I could go 3 nights and I still would only have used maybe 10 or 12% of the battery bank's rated capacity. And batteries like that. They like to only operate in the 10% capacity range. So they go between 100% full and 90% full, 100% full, 90% full. Your lead acid batteries will love you if you give them a life like that. So, under these circumstances, it becomes necessary to use one of these. And this is a 3000 watt generator. It's got a 250cc motor. It's an air-cooled, overhead valve, push rod operated from a camshaft down in the crankcase, normally aspirated spark ignition engine. 250cc, direct driving an alternator, which is probably 85% efficient. And how efficient can that be? In 1943, A Spitfire aeroplane had an engine that was about 1,400 horsepower, and the 1,400 horsepower Spitfire engine was 28% efficient. It had a 2-speed intercooled 2-stage supercharger and double overhead camshafts. And the engine in the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine in a Vickers Supermarine Spitfire was only 28% efficient. I gravely doubt that that thing is as good as 28%. Yeah, it's a single cylinder 4-stroke petrol engine to run a 240 volt generator going to be more fuel efficient than a World War II fighter plane? I don't think so. I think the Spitfire is going to have the technological edge even now. Maybe perhaps if you hypothesize that needle roller bearings on both ends of the connecting rod and on the crankshaft, maybe that cuts away enough friction. Maybe they've got needle rollers on the camshaft as well. Maybe, perhaps, possibly, that would get that engine up to the 27-28% efficiency mark, but I doubt it. As far as I know, the absolute record for efficiency claims on a spark ignition engine, something like 32%. And that was, you know, like 4 valves per cylinder head, variable valve timing, fuel injection, turbocharged, all the bells and whistles, and it was going around a, you know, Formula One racetrack. So that engine can't be any more than 27% efficient. That's my guess. It's just my guess. But here's the funny bit. The 50cc motor on the Tanaka Brushcutter has been drinking 1 litre per hour. When I put the 300 watt battery into the Brushcutter and I cut for an hour and a half, I then pull that battery out, and on a cloudy day I put the QC250, 250 watts, onto the Brushcutter battery that's just done 1.5 hours in the field, 85 minutes, 1 hour and 22 minutes to recharge it. 90 minutes, this is cycle number 6, 1 hour and 25 minutes to recharge it. The Brushcutter that's done 1 hour being charged by solar power takes 2 hours and 25 minutes. But the point is, when the generator is only charging the BLI 300 watt hour battery with a QC250 battery charger, and it goes for 1 hour and 25 minutes, it uses 710 mils of fuel. 710 millilitres of 91 octane unleaded, no alcohol fuel for an hour and a half. That's 500 mils per hour in a 250cc motor versus 1 litre at $2.40 per litre per hour in the Tanaka. This thing uses 16.3, 1.34 I think, mils of petrol per hour. Relay that, mils of petrol per minute. 16.34 mils of petrol per minute to operate the Brushcutter. This thing, to operate the same, the electric Brushcutter doing the same work as the petrol Brushcutter, it only takes 8.34 mils per minute. A 4-stroke generator, or 4-stroke internal combustion engine turning an electric alternator, charging up a lithium-ion battery, going into an electric Brushcutter, is twice as fuel efficient as a 2-stroke engine on the Brushcutter. And Warbles' mind is completely fucking blown. I never ever expected I was going to get a result like that. I thought, this is the backup. Only use it when I absolutely have to, because it'll probably, you know, you'd be lucky to have the big 4-stroke generator not use more petrol than the little, lightweight 2-stroke motor on the Brushcutter. It just never occurred to me that the 2-stroke motor on the Brushcutter is so foul in terms of efficiency that burn the petrol in a proper engine with valves, 4-stroke Otto cycle, burn the petrol in that engine, put the twistiness through an alternator, then take the excited electrons and put them into a battery, and then pull it out of the battery through an electric motor. And here's the kicker: the electric motor is 92% efficient. The lithium-ion batteries are 92% efficient. So yeah, even burning petrol in an electric Brushcutter is twice as efficient as burning petrol in a petrol Brushcutter. Bloody amazing. Here's the other thing, funny story. Those of you familiar with the channel will no doubt notice the sudden apparition of multiple cooling cutouts in the end walls of the hutch. Well, this is because the first time I tried to run the 3000 watt generator inside the old hutch, which was designed for a 2 kVA, much smaller generator, when I came back to it, even though it was a cloudy, cold, miserable grey day, top of the hutch was hotter than it is in sunlight, uncomfortably hot. When I shut the generator down, it sounded like there was a cooling fan running, a sort of a hissing noise. Turned out the fuel in the tank was boiling, and the hissing noise was the noise of all the bubbles breaking. So I backed off and gently let it cool down, and then I added cooling holes, and that solved that problem. The next time I ran the generator with the same load for the same amount of time, it burnt 250 mils less petrol. So I literally boiled away bloody near a coffee cup full. People wonder why I haven't started playing with the electric motorbike yet. At this stage of the game, Chrissy is sneaking up on the motorbike by learning the mysteries of electric brush cutter, chainsaw and leaf blower. And at the moment, 8.35 mils per minute to run the generator and only charge the Husqvarna battery. But if I care to add another 4.72 mils per minute, I can get 5 amps at 12 volts going into the pyramid batteries. So that gives me about 8 amp hours of hut lighting battery storage, and we're still only putting out about 13 mils per minute, or drinking 13 mils per minute. So that generator is capable of recharging the electric brush cutter and putting about 100 watt hours into the hut batteries, and still use about 180 mils of petrol per hour less than the bloody Tanaka. Yeah, I just, mind blown. Mind blown. I lied. 224 cc, 3000 RPM. Yeah, 1 cylinder, 4-stroke, overhead valve, air cooled. 50 cc, single cylinder, 2-stroke, air cooled, bypass ports. Okay, so you got to log it. 300 watt battery number one's done 6 hours 28 minutes. 200 watt battery has done 2 hours 48 minutes. The number 3 BLI 300 has done 6 hours 45 minutes. Brushcutter's done 11 hours 33 minutes. Chainsaw's done 2 hours 45 minutes. Leaf blower's done 1 hour and 45 minutes. Generator about 8 3/4 hours. So at this point, the changeover has resulted in something like 16.5 hours of operating time across the 3 machines, 16.5 litres of petrol, not burnt directly in the machines. And yeah, I've probably burnt perhaps 4 litres in the generator actually charging these batteries. I've been doing other things with the generator other times, but yeah, so far 75% of the power that's gone into there has been solar power, and the other 25%, which was petrol, went through twice as efficiently as if I still had a petrol brush cutter as my main machine. So all up, very, very, very pleased with the changeover. Very highly impressed with all 3 new machines. They all work really well, but the brush cutter is the one I've spent the most time on because that's this time of year. And quite honestly, if I hadn't measured the fuel, filled the tank, measured the fuel burn after each run time, if I hadn't logged it all, I would have no hope of convincing anybody, because I don't think I would have believed it if a salesman told me this story in a shop. If an electric brush cutter salesman said, oh, you can use your electric brush cutter on a generator and it'll still use half the petrol that your petrol powered brush cutter that he'll sell you in the same shop was going to burn. You can buy a petrol brush cutter the same size and power output as the electric one, and it costs the same amount of money. It's just that when you buy the electric one, you're going to buy the first year and a half worth of petrol in the form of a battery and a charger. And yeah, you could argue that it is better for the planet to run an electric brush cutter on a coal-fired power station than it is to have everybody with their own little two-stroke guzzling fuel and spitting unburned hydrocarbons. As I said, after a lifetime of using two-stroke petrol motors to do all manner of things, I'm just amazed, gobsmacked. Behold, I was blind and now I see. The scales have been lifted off from above mine eyes. What was I like YouTube? Electrificate everything that you can afford so to do. As soon as you can do it. You won't regret it. Have a good one. Ciao. Day drinking. Somebody has to do it. Why not me? You see? I never get tired of that. 20 past 10, which is 20 past 9 Eastern Daylight Saving Time. No. 20 past 9 is what it would be Eastern Standard Time. It's 20 past 10 Eastern Daylight Saving Time. And even with all that alignment, there's only 5 amps going in because we're into absorb charge routine. Regulator holding 14.3, 17 volts on the panels. It's only letting 5.3 amps go through. So yeah, effectively the batteries are pretty much full. This early on in the morning, which is why this system will allow me brush cut for an hour and a half per sunny day for free, as well as run the hut lights at night. Ciao.